What's up guys, Thomas. If you guys saw my story a couple days ago, you probably know what the direction of this video is heading towards. But it does seem like, with every passing day that I spend on this godforsaken app that we call TikTok as a non-agentive observer, there's always some type of political discourse that is being had on this app. And it always seems to, it never fails to derail by the time that I would like to get involved. And although I feel like that has already occurred, I did want to use this entire situation regarding the accountability archives, to talk about archival work, archivists, and the importance of archives. As mentioned previously, the derailing has already occurred, so I don't really care to realign the tracks of the TikTok discourse trolley car onto the track again. I'm going to realign them onto something else, and that's more informative content. So I'm not here to give tea. I'm not here to go and talk about other people. The only thing I will say is if I ever mention any creator, if I ever mention any creators, it's only for the sole basis of my informative content. I'm not going to sit here and say like, oh my god, this person's doing this and this person... No. As a constant observer of everything, it is very exhausting, so I will choose to keep my peace. And I know some people might sit there and question, why are you getting involved even if you already recognize that it is too late? And that is because archives just absolutely fascinate me. Not only archives themselves, but the way that they have been represented has, historically served to keep the elites and the marginalized as disconnected as possible. And this is an extremely deliberate weaponization of archives that leads to very disillusioned and misinformed perspectives about them. This is why the leading understanding or misunderstanding to some people is that archives are simply just ancient artifacts that have been collecting dust for millennia for an archivist to go and wipe clean and discover. And although, like I said, those are archives, so it's not exactly a misunderstanding, but that's not just what archives are, and it's a disservice to generalize the significance and generalize the practice to just that. I think a lot of people just think that archives are just, sculptures or something of ancient times, and no, it's not just that. Archives are filled with a plethora of materials from books, napkins, blankets, clothing, you have emails, texts nowadays, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, cookbooks, poems, writings, everything. And like I said, it's not just ancient artifacts. We are actively living while we're making history, so it is important to archive the present as well. That's why archives may hold things from 1862 and also 2024. It is important, it is significant, it is needed to ensure a fuller scope of the world that somebody will study, 10 or 10,000 years down the line. So why is specifically an accountability archive important? Like I just said, in combating the misconceptions of archival material, I revealed that archives and the materials that are being stored in the present are ever more important. Archives allow knowledge to become more accessible and to spread more rapidly, which is exactly what is needed right now, especially in the time of the United States that we are going through, where, anti-intellectualism, right-wing ideologies, bigoted propaganda are just on the rise, they're on the run, they're going crazy. So to combat those things, to combat the propaganda, archives allow people to create their own propaganda, to preserve their own history, and to challenge historical and dominant narratives. Archives allow the people to physically become in control of the construction of what will become their past, what we will remember. It is a form of political protest, and almost most importantly, it counters the experiences and the history they carry from being bunched into others' perspectives and fantasies, which I do think we are seeing a little bit, when it comes to the accountability archive. I don't, and I may never know the exact content of this archive, but with liberals already beginning to rewrite the intentions and rewrite the purpose of both their actions and the archive itself, that pushes even more of a need for an accountability archive, or just an archive in general. Because like I said, it controls the construction of our past and what we remember and what we think and what we deem as fact. When an archive is created, it harbors the opportunity for an archivist to aid in the shaping of epistemology, of what we as society deem and differentiate from opinion to fact. This is why then at the end of the day, liberals, conservatives, right-wing people, politicians, centrists, elitists, etc. can all say anything and everything that they would like to. The archive will be the liberating factor. Archives are what dispute and resist the continued adaptations of bigotry and racial mystifications of people. So yeah, when it comes to the specific archive regarding how people have talked and discussed things about Palestine, an archive like that can serve as proof of innocence and proof of all the wrongdoing surrounding the marginalized, affected community. And like I said, I can't speak for what this archive holds and the content that it carries, only the potential that it holds. And now that we have talked about how archives matter to me and how an accountability archive matters, why is this specific archive so important? Why does it mean so much to me? To put it simply, it is because it is a digital archive, allegedly being held on some type of flash drive. It will carry digital material and it will constitute a digital archive. And a digital archive is one of the most accessible forms of archival work for researchers, for archivists, and the public. And if you don't know what a digital archive is, I understand that we just barely got into dismantling the myth of what archives are in the first couple minutes, so let's just get into what a digital archive is. Now this is going to sound extremely redundant, but it's what I tell people about my major as well when I graduated from UC Irvine. They were like, oh, what'd you do? I said social ecology, and I said break it up. Just break up social and break up ecology and then put them together after you break them up and divide what they mean. Do the same with digital archives. Just say digital physical archive, define both of them, and then add digital archive together. So I'm sure we're all familiar with the word digital. Digital is everything, you know, your e-paycheck, your email, all the games you've downloaded on your PS5 because you didn't want to get the disc version, you know, every single file, app, photo on your phone. All of it is digital because it quite literally does not exist in the physical. And we think this because obviously then, you know, your email with 97,240 notifications would not be like 97,240 physical copies of mail on your doorstep. And as for archives, I think the brief introduction that I had a couple minutes ago will supplement enough. So when you put two together, digital archives are the materials, whether physical or material, made digital and then stored on devices like your phone or your computer. So if you go onto this amazing website called Calisphere, or if you even check out my amazing mutuals, former love poets, Walt Ways, you know, their link tree, you will see digital archives. Those are digital archives if you wanted to see what they look like in the real world. All of these digital archives are made available at the touch of a screen. Essentially, digital archiving is simply the process of storing and saving material digitally, and then obviously curating it in a way to tell a story, counter suppression, teach, etc., etc. And so now that we know why all that matters, why is a digital archive so important? In an age and era as digitally active as the one that many of us have inherited, it is vital that we as people interact digitally and remain digitally active as much as possible. And apart from archives, you can find this significance everywhere. It's very exemplary through, you know, the use of social media and the various ways that the medium is used to push out bigotry to the masses and then to combat it as well. Stitch content and short form content has basically revolutionized the game and how you can push propaganda, you know, in either direction. This is why you can see a video about Trump and the next video is somebody dismantling and breaking down, you know, his law, his policy, you know, his rhetoric, etc., etc. I don't know about effective, but it's been a very, very commonly used way to, you know, hold accountable, you know, celebrities, other content creators, and just fellow people on the internet. Another reason digital archives are so important is because, like I said, you know, everything is moving to the internet. Newspapers and news outlets have been continuing to shift away from as many physical copies as needed. Platforms like TikTok, YouTube, Instagram have been very vital in their efforts in bringing awareness and cognizance to the complex hardships of, you know, the Congolese, the Sudanese, and the Palestinian people, as well as, you know, people in the US and other parts of the country. But like I've said, you know, these platforms have also moved in the opposite way. And this is how, in an age of digital information, we have continued to lose or gain incorrect memories. We need to begin thinking imaginatively for the use of archives, and digital archives are a great way to push out the correct version of our histories. This is how we can learn a correct history by creating our own. And this requires us to scale the way that we tell our story from everywhere to politicians, elitists, everyone at the top of the pyramid to, yes, fellow citizens as well. So we have to include digital materials that range from, you know, your tweets and your laws and your policies from your senators and your mayors to, yes, the people and the tweets and the TikTok, you know, videos from user 296385, you know? And again, the accessibility component of digital archives is really vital, and it's really why I love digital archives. There are typically barriers to entry in regards to archival work and research, and being able to make your own archive with as little as internet provider, internet service, or a phone is like revolutionary, really. It's an extraordinarily empowering capability that we all have hold of. I'll find a way to link it in this TikTok video as well, but on my Substack, I did link it where I basically had a tutorial that I made on how to make digital archives while I was at UCI with my cohort. So I'm just going to try to link that so you guys can find it because it's a great way to build your own archive. Before getting into your own digital archive, the one thing that I want to say though is I'm really glad what Maddie Swan did is have a flash drive. I do want you guys to understand that digital archives are not a complete replacement of archives in general. I'm really glad they have a flash drive because simply storing your files on a Google Drive or storing them on your desktop computer, not secure enough. There's just too much wrong that can happen if you just rely on e-files, you know what I mean? Like, complete too much revolutionary work for too long, a little bit too much time, and Google can always decide to wipe your files. Or, you know, what if you're in a fire? What if your computer breaks down? What if your files go corrupt? You always want to have some type of backup copy. So not only make multiple copies, but make sure that your archives can be found in a multitude of areas. You know, make a website where they're there, put them on Google Drive, put them on your desktop computer, make 5 flash drives, have so many outlets of accessibility for your own archive, because just simply putting it in one area could be a little bit scary. And lastly, I cannot reiterate this enough, but I am going to. I cannot stress how important the formation of our knowledge and memory is. For generations before us, we have been fed specific information that has severely altered what we deem as fact, what issues we probe, what history we think is relevant, and how we view our own marginalization and the marginalization of others. For Latinos and Mexicans specifically for my conversation, very little historical information is presented to us, which allows us to reconnect with our culture and see ourselves within history. A lot of history ties our plight to the border or language discrimination, and that tight soul connection provides pathways for US Latino citizens to detach themselves from the struggles of our own people and to move over towards assimilation and Americanization. And that's why I think some of the recent voting polls of US Latinos, you know, kind of prove evidence of this continued shift further right. The laws of Juan Crow are not mentioned in parallel parallel to Jim Crow, the victims of lynchings and the revolutionaries that are persecuted by the US government, the Mendez versus Westminster case, the Chicano movement. All of it is left to your own personal study or Latino Chicano studies, textbooks and in these articles that nobody tells you how or where to find over the internet. And for other groups as well, when we allow the ruling class to determine our history, the masses aren't cognizant of the ethnic Chinese populations in the states, especially like California. The history provided for us disallows us from connecting the Mendez versus Westminster case to the Brown of Board Education case, adding further context to the Black American struggle and finding solidarity with one another through our shared fight for liberation. And I think analyzing and reconfiguring our own history allows us to really see and view the scope of what we're supposed to be. I'm a third generation Mexican Guatemalan with parents and grandparents who are US citizens. I don't speak Spanish. I wasn't taught Spanish growing up. I was completely disconnected from my culture growing up. I grew up in a majority white and Asian community. I shouldn't be the person that I am today, and that recognition is pivotal to understanding the United States' colonial logic, subjugation, and the epistemology they have formed for the masses. And a message for the liberals: I can admit that no matter how chronically I am as a spectator and no matter how much I remove myself from reactionary takes, I can still fall victim to whatever belies before me on my For You page. Echo chambers may always exist over the internet, and so I recognize that the things that I'm about to say to you guys may come with bias and ignorance. I'm always willing to accept criticism and to continue my growth both as a learner and an educator of the world. But now that that has been said, from my narrow perspective that the internet has curated for me, a good chunk of the discourse that I have consumed on TikTok regarding the accountability archives has been liberal content creators stitching this person, this Maddie Swan, and attempting to define the intentions of their archive through two distinct videos. One where they talk about how they have an archive where, content creators and TikTokers are definitely within it, and then another hypocritical video where Maddie Swan backpedals and explains how the archive is basically about politicians and, the elites, and there's only a small fraction of it, containing TikTokers.
Let's clear the air. I have been keeping a fucking flash drive of you bitches on this app and the nasty, terrible things that you said just for my own documentation purposes to prove that y'all were not on the right side of this shit when it was important to be. And if you really want to know what's in the flash drive, it's a small proportion of TikTok videos, but it's mostly politicians.
Regardless of what the truth is, I like to advise the people complaining to go make your own archive. If you feel that there are genuinely bad sentiments or harmful intentions that come along this accountability archive, now is a ripe opportunity to present a story that you feel is untold. If anyone is to take any overarching lesson from this video, I would hope it would be to fight history by creating your own. Add your archives that allow the discourse to move past hearsay. In a world as reactionary as ours, it becomes very difficult to decipher a fact from a myth. Use an archive to help alleviate this issue rather than add fuel to the fire. I feel like a lot of your stitches are not helping. Sometimes through our efforts to point out the harm, we perpetuated ourselves. In attempts at making this accountability archive analogous to the surveillance state, you have all created archival prisons that seek to determine what can and cannot be published, which is the epitomization of panopticism and vigilant surveillance. We definitely need to be better. Start and end your story with an archive, and it may start and end with truth and justice. Lastly, what does the future entail? As the future unravels for archives, so does the potential for their impact and role in society. A future for archives should begin shifting the archival setting even closer to community archives, focusing and involving the perspectives of the victims. Present and future archives have ample enough room to begin promoting accountability and social justice, all while legitimizing and sanctifying knowledge. We live in a fragmented world which archives can help piece back together. It's needed now more than ever to begin controlling communities' knowledge and to continue deepening the perspective of world events that the ruling class would love nothing more than to see develop into gaps of historical knowledge that disallow further class consciousness and solidarity. For Maddie Swan and any other person that happens to be building their own personal archive, my largest piece of advice is to ensure that you avoid neutrality. When we think about the construction of our history, we can sometimes perceive it to be solely an arbitrary concept, and in telling these stories and in fact-checking, we feel the need to remain passive and impartial. Leaving your story up to others' interpretations leaves room for erasure of your intentions and the communities that it involves. An archive serves little purpose if it doesn't help lead to representational belonging, and can so easily fall into the hands of people who would like nothing more than to symbolically annihilate that community or those communities. In being intentional, please understand that this is a political act. There will always be politics involved, and you need to continue using them to take power. Embrace your worldview, your bias, your ignorance, your positionality, your perspective. Those qualities make your power and are the heart and soul of your archive. And plus, archives have historically never been neutral. They have primarily served the ruling class, its rule, and all of its interests. It was just in the 70s where Howard Zinn was determined to be this radical historian, all for not feeding the indoctrination and propaganda machine that so many before him have fed. dead. Memory is largely a political act, and we finally get to select and neglect what to make valid and what to make illegitimate. The present is the best time to ensure that our memories are being remembered. And remember to scale your story as far and wide as you need it to be. Too often, the focus remains on the elites, and that is important, but we must also view the state's extension through the everyday actions of an everyday citizen as well, both the good and the bad. To conclude, although this freedom of choice still comes with factors that may be problematic and need to be vetted appropriately, these archives will hold the gifts that we will give to future generations. So what gifts are we considering to be the most precious? What will we save and let die within our hearts? We live with the past, constantly build history out of the present, and we work to build our future. Let an archive guide you through that navigation of time. And maybe throw in an oral history or two there as well, you know what I mean? See ya.